Hello and welcome to our weekly talk. And we are very excited. We are again joined with Ali and Ethan. Ali, you can take us ahead with your chosen
Okay,
topic.
so US unemployment has risen like a lot. It has been the highest since November of last year, and we are in specifically what we would say the worst of COVID times. And unemployment is still rising with also rising inflation. It's like a double whammy. There have been like applications for jobless aid has climbed from 14,000 to 262,000 in the last 6 weeks. That is according to the Labor Department, and the news source would be Washington AP. So these are some worrying numbers, especially for the US since their economy is in a decline for a while. Is like that amount in job aid applications is quite worrying in the least sense. I feel like that rise is like way too high from 14,000 to 262,000. That is like extreme.
Yeah. I mean, there's many reasons that the inflation is happening. But I feel one of the biggest reasons right now is just have a high demand, since the needs for almost every household is increasing with jobs like traveling, transportation, and everything. So the high demand is causing inflation a lot. But that's the problem with the high demand is that the US institutions or the companies or their supply chains are not able to cope up with the pressure and the high demand. So this is why.
I think the US companies and factories are able to keep up with high demand. I think it's just a lack of supplies in general. Everything is taking a big hit. So like especially with the war in Ukraine, and obviously with Spain's harvest, maybe Spain's harvest is not as big of an issue as the war in Ukraine, but the supply chain has been hit. And I think their factories are more than capable of handling the demand in the US. I think it's just a lack of material available to do much with it. And the US is pretty much back to normal from what I've seen. Sporting events are still huge numbers turning up. And there's just not enough supplies to keep up with their demand. So I think that's a big issue. And as a result, companies, they can't keep up to pay their employees. So some have to be let go, and that's why I think the unemployment rate is quite high. And no one wants to hire either because there's just not enough.
Yeah, and lower income communities have been hit the hardest, since a lot of their income and like all the money they earn goes towards essentials like water, electricity, schools for their kids, transportation. So they don't really have a lot of money left for anything else. So that's also becoming a big problem, is that they aren't able to the government isn't able to satisfy the needs of the low income and the high income together. So that is becoming a big issue.
I feel that also, since there aren't very good job protection laws, companies can let go of any amount of employees they want at any given time. So when they do take a hit, they can just fire any amount of employees freely. And without any justifiable cause other than they have had poor financials, which ends up hurting the employees rather than the company, whilst the company stays afloat. And people who have taken no part in that mistake are the ones who get hurt in the end. And then they don't get governmental aid until they find a new job.
Yeah.
But
And since there has been economic decline in general in the US, there are going to be less and less companies who actually need employees.
and
Yeah.
I think what's also done differently in Europe is, for example, during COVID, governments would lend out money to these businesses to try and keep them afloat, to avoid have to firing these employees. But in the US, I think there's just so many corporations and multinational companies, it's very difficult to bail out or to help fund these companies, unless it's a really essential businesses like NASA, for example. It's a very important institution to keep afloat. But other companies, they're not, I don't think they'd receive as much funds to stay afloat. And that's why companies just have to fire employees if they want to keep going.
But what I also wanted to point out is that since there's going to be like a lesser demand in actual employment, most people are going to turn to self-employment in order to generate enough income.
Yeah.
So we might see a lot of smaller businesses popping up in the US and or around the world because of this high in unemployment. This
Another
could be
reason
both,
I feel, yeah.
Yeah, this could be both beneficial for like the world, or it can also be more worrisome towards other countries that do not want to support the small business mindset.
And the thing with inflation is, like, a few of the easiest methods to reduce inflation is to either the government can start taxing the citizens in the country so that they earn the money back, or they can cut their spending. And US government, if they do the first one, if they tax the citizens more, that's just going to cause a lot of social uproar and a lot of like disagreement, especially with the low income people.
Yeah,
But
taxing
the
would
thing
not work.
is, the government can cut spending, but the problem they're having is they are being too far connected with other things like military, helping other countries, and maybe they're forgetting about themselves or the low income groups in their countries who are struggling a lot. So instead of focusing on providing funds to external sources which aren't directly benefiting the country, maybe they can focus on their country more.
But I think it also has to do with the social ideologies in the US. Is many people support fighting against terrorism, protecting the country, being part of the military. So any proposal to cut military spending is not going to go down well.
Yeah.
And I think that also has to do with the ideology in the US, this idea of fighting terrorism, protecting the country, supporting the troops. I think it's a pretty bad situation to be in.